Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's GRIFE public seminar. I'm Lixun. I'm the Associate Director of GRIFE, which is Global Research Institute for Finnish, European, and Global South Education. We're running a Finnish Education and Global Perspective seminar series. Okay, this is one of the seminars in the series. And today we are very fortunate to have invited Professor Yrjö Engeström, okay, yeah, from Finland. Yeah, Finnish is not easy, but yeah, I try my best. Okay, Professor Engeström is Professor Emeritus of Education at University of Helsinki and Professor Emeritus of Communication at University of California, San Diego. He's director of the Center for Research on Activity, Development, and Learning, CRADLE, in Helsinki. Professor Engeström is visiting professor at Rhodes University, South Africa, and at University West, Sweden. Professor Engeström applies and develops cultural historical activity theory and the theory of expansive learning in studies of transformations in education, work, communities, and social movements. He is known for the methodology of formative interventions and the change laboratory method. His most recent book is Concept Formation in the Wild, published by Cambridge University Press in 2024. Okay, from 1995 to 2000, Professor Engeström served as academic professor appointed by the Academy of Finland. From 2000 to 2005, he led a National Center of Excellence in Research. He received an honorary doctorate at University of Oslo, Norway in 2005, and at University of Ioannina, Greece in 2018. In 2021, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award of the Cultural Historical Research, SIG, of the American Educational Research Association. So his series has influenced so many of us. So we are very fortunate to have him here today to share his research on the topic, Change Laboratories in Schools, Moving into the Zone of Proximal Development. Let's warmly welcome Professor Engeström.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. You mentioned that Finnish is a difficult language, and sometimes other Europeans call Finnish the Chinese of Europe, because it's they say that these two languages are equally difficult, and you have your own tremendously demanding language in terms of just the very alphabet but the Finnish language has, 14 different cases, so that you use endings at the end of the word, and there are 14 different ones. So it's complex enough, but not nearly as complex as yours. Anyway, last week I had the first lecture in this series, which was about the theoretical foundations, cultural historical activity theory. And I believe that those slides are still available. So if some of you are interested or may want to go back to those slides, they're available. And I'm also very happy to eventually, if you find issues that you want to ask questions or discuss, I'd be happy to do that also via email, for instance. Because these kind of visits are relatively short, and if there's interest, I think it's very important to be able to continue interaction. And today's lecture is more about the practical aspect, namely how to conduct interventions in school settings. What did I do wrong? Oh, yeah. This one. Yes, very good. Now I went too far. Yes. This is the first one. Yes. The challenge in many organizations, and typically also schools, is that there are transformations, changes, which are triggered often by outside pressures, but also from within, because there are growing problems and that we might call contradictions. And usually what is offered is relatively simple, quick fixes. And those seldom work in a very sustainable way. So what is needed is sort of expansive, durable solutions, which can actually sustainably help to bring the activity to a new level, to meet the challenges of the time. And these kinds of changes are facilitated by what we call formative interventions. We call them formative because they are not predetermined in the sense of what is the outcome. In traditional linear interventions, the outcome is known ahead of time, and then you just have to design an effective program to actually reach that outcome. So let's say classical examples would be a program to reduce smoking. You know that you want to reduce the smoking. Then you have to design a program that influences people's behavior, and you can measure, okay, so and so many people have quit smoking, and therefore you can measure the efficiency and effectiveness of this program. But basically, the outcome is known ahead of time. Unfortunately, these types of programs often, they have relatively short-term impact. For instance, smoking is a good example that lots of behavior change programs have been tried. They have not been very effective. What is then effective eventually is that you make it illegal to smoke. In other words, you say that in this space, smoke is illegal, and you pay $1,000 if you are caught. That's not anymore intervention, that's legislation. So oftentimes these linear interventions, which sort of have a predetermined outcome, are relatively ineffective. Often experts say that they can be very costly, but the results seldom match the expectations. And the reason is simply that they are not rooted in the root causes. What causes the problematic behavior? Therefore, in formative interventions, as we call them, the idea is to go to the roots, to ask where does this problem come from? What are the basic historically formed tensions, contradictions that generate this kind of problematic issues? And this means that also the participants, the people who are actually involved in this given activity, are brought in to participate in the analysis, because they are eventually the ones who have to implement the solutions. If you give the solutions from above, there is always some resistance. But if the solutions are designed by those who have to implement them, for instance, teachers themselves, then it's much more likely that they will be pursued with persistence and also developed further by those who actually implement them. But this type of interventions are much more demanding than the traditional linear interventions, because you actually have to expect that something unknown emerges. You don't know exactly what to do. In other words, the researcher interventionist must be ready to take surprises. And in fact, a formative intervention is not successful if it only produces what was expected. There's not a genuine creative effort involved. And the formative interventions differ from traditional action. Because action research also, okay, it says that participants find solutions. But action research seldom offers you much tools, much conceptual instruments to actually do the analysis and to do the design. Action research tends to be built on the idea, listen to the practitioners, let them decide. That's fine, but the practitioners do not necessarily have the instruments to conduct the analysis. That's why they are in the trouble to begin. And therefore, we in formative interventions, we emphasize that conceptual tools, conceptual instruments, in this case, very much cultural historical activity theory, are needed to empower the practitioners to do the analysis and design in a way that goes beyond their everyday experience and allows them to step in their own zone of proximal development, as we say. Now, the most commonly used formative intervention is called change laboratory. This was designed and first implemented in 1995 in Finland. In my research center, the work after that with change laboratories has spread quite wide. Now, I recently counted, and there were, I think, 33 countries in which there have been published studies using change laboratories. It's increasing. Oops. Increasing this kind of dissemination and adoption. Of course, this means also that this method must be flexible. It cannot be a sort of tight package that you just simply transplant from one place to another. It must be kind of readjusted to the local circumstances. So these variations are also very important. And I will present two examples in this lecture of implementations of change laboratories, which are quite different, so that you can see also the variation a little bit. The change laboratory is conducted in one activity system, for instance, a school, or multiple ones if needed, which are somehow interconnected. For instance, one of the early change laboratories we conducted in Finland was with local children's hospital, and then which is connected to local primary care health centers, so that this network of interconnected activity systems was involved. Because it was obvious that the care of chronically ill children typically is divided between hospital and the primary care, and of course the families themselves. So basically these three kinds of activities, the hospital, the primary care health centers, and the families were involved. So it depends on the target, on the challenge that you're trying to address. Whether you have one single activity system or multiple ones involved. And prior to this intervention, we need field work. We need to get fully immersed in the activity to understand, at least to some extent, the local dynamics of the activity as the practitioners experience them. So it's not something like a researcher can just rush in and tell people how to do it. It must also become at least reasonably familiar with the insides of the activity. typically, we spend 2-3 months doing fieldwork. Often so that at least some members of the research group really spend whole days observing, discussing, following, shadowing the practitioners, so that they can develop a very rich repertoire of images and experiences, and also documentation, locally developed documentation, statistics, but also a lot of videotaping. Whenever it's possible, we like to use video recording because it creates a more powerful stimuli than for the actual intervention. When we can show examples from the everyday practice or from interviews with practitioners, that's very effective, what we call first stimuli. That brings back the reality, more effective than just a sort of account or story or a piece of statistics. And who are involved in a change laboratory? It's also a decision that has to be made in the adjusting to the local circumstances. The first change laboratory I conducted in a school, in a middle school in Finland, it had about 25 teachers. It was not a very big school. So all the teachers were involved in the change laboratory. It was very kind of optimal because nobody was left out. But if you have a very large organization which has 100 employees, for instance, that's too much. You cannot effectively create a context of mutual discussion and exchange if there are too many people. So then you have to sort of decide on some way of representation, and perhaps also build a way of intermediate dissemination of the process to others who are not directly involved. So you can have kind of sessions in which the participants will explain what they have been doing to all the other staff members, for instance. So that's always a little bit of a challenge because often we deal with quite large organizations. But for instance, in a hospital organization which may have 500 or 1,000 people working there, it's important to negotiate how we ensure that those who are most relevant for this effort will participate, and yet not to alienate the others. So that's part of the preparation, is this negotiation of who participates. Another issue there is often, what about the managers? Shall the top managers or the middle managers also participate? Often it's very beneficial that they participate because it means that they are involved directly, and then they are committed to whatever is designed. Involves also the managers. But sometimes we have also experienced that the frontline workers say, if the manager is here, people are too intimidated and they don't speak. And then we have discussed it with the manager, said, listen, we want people to be feel safe and free to speak honestly. And maybe we can do that so that you step in after a few sessions and not from the very beginning, for instance. So these various combinations can be done. The important thing is that we need to open up channels of mutual communication rather than enforce boundaries. But that's also a matter of local negotiation. Oftentimes in schools, it's quite clear that the principal is so heavily involved in the everyday activity that it's quite natural that the principal participates. I don't recall any school-based change laboratory where the principal has been excluded, simply because the distance between the teachers and the principal often is not that big. And I've been I was fortunate to be visiting a couple of schools already here in Hong Kong, and the principals clearly in both schools were very much involved with the everyday activity of the teachers, and the distance was not so, the hierarchy was not so big. But for instance, in a big hospital, the the top manager can be quite far away from the, let's say, from the everyday work of nurses. And then, of course, there can be some historical reasons of distrust. So that those need to be carefully worked out to develop sufficient trust that people feel safe and confident to speak up honestly. This is a crucial requirement. And of course, different cultures are different. I've been observing a change laboratory conducted in China, in Beijing. It was an online change laboratory. And I was struck that, of course, the Chinese culture is such that people seldom openly challenge the authority. And that's absolutely fine. But you then have to carefully listen, because the challenges can be formulated in a much more gentle and subtle way. In some other cultures, they might say, "Oh, you're wrong," or you know, openly disagree with the authority. But it's in other cultures that you have to formulate it differently. So it requires a lot of cultural sensitivity. Therefore, I would not dare to conduct myself a change laboratory in China. I would I have been observing and supporting, but not being the lead interventionist, because that would be like putting an elephant in a porcelain shop. It doesn't make sense. The participants, they come together typically, you know, depending on the type of circumstances, it may be between 6 and 12 sessions. Usually the sessions are held relatively close to one another, sometimes every week or every 2 weeks, so that the process has continuity. If there is a too long gap between sessions, that the risk is that people forget and you kind of have to start over again. And typically the session lasts a couple of hours. Usually it's held within the premises of the actual workplace, school or other workplace, so that people can feel that this is about us. And this is about this particular organization, this particular workplace, this particular activity. The very first change laboratory was held in 1995 in the Finnish postal services, in post offices. And usually the only space where we could do it was men's dressing room, because there were no meeting rooms. But it was actually very good, because then the participants felt that this is about our everyday life. They, you know, if you take the participants out to some other hotel or training center, it easily kind of creates already kind of artificial situation that you, oh, we are being trained. But this is not about being trained. In fact, the participants are supposed to train themselves and the organization. So it kind of requires that they have ownership. The participants must realize that this is our stuff. Nobody's going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. So they come together, and the initial impulse is what we call the mirror material. Namely, we select from the fieldwork materials, select samples which depict critical issues. So often it's critical troubles or challenges that are depicted, for instance, in a school. They might be depicted in a lesson. And if you use a real sample, of course, you have to ask the participants the permission. Can we use this? And you have to convince the participant that this is not in order to blame you. We are not trying to show that you're doing something wrong. We are trying to approach systemic issues, systemic challenges, which are not caused by any individual as such. This is a very important shift. Getting out of the sort of blaming type of attitude toward, we have to together discover the root causes. This kind of mirror material is supposed to trigger the what we call a conflict of motives, that we have here a challenge which is not easy to resolve. We need to do something about it, but at the same time it's difficult. And then the participants engage in analyzing the historical roots of this problem. Often they go back, we can say, all right, when do you think this problem began? Was it here 10 years ago? So we trace back historically. Often we use what we call a history wall. We put on the wall long, they can be flip charts or just a whiteboard, and put year by year and ask the participants to bring their own experiences, memories, photographs, documents, like for instance, this year something happened, and then they write it down or bring some document about it, and then we discuss it. What happened? Gradually, this way, the participants construct a kind of collective memory and trace the origins of the present problems. This is an important step toward historical analysis, but then eventually this leads to an actual use of analytical instruments. We come to that very soon. And then further, they start to project future possibilities, possible ways to move forward. We call it charting the zone of proximal development. And that's never just one way. The zone of proximal development, it's typically charted as a sort of open domain of possibilities, possible alternative directions. And to chart that, it's very important, because then gradually the participants can decide what is the most desirable and most promising direction to go. So it's not about determining an end result or goal, it's determining the zone. And that's a very different kind of design, because you're not yet saying, in the year that and that we will behave like that and that. You will say, this is these are the, let's say, alternative directions to solve the current problems, to resolve the current contradictions. And we need to figure out spearheads toward that, which gradually then will open up the desirable direction. It is not immediately fixed. That's why, and this is of course the concept originally from Vygotsky, zone of proximal development. It's very important that it's not the goal of proximal development, but it's a zone. Think about it, if you want to go from here to some nearby place, there's probably alternative routes, not just one way to go. And in a way, that the area between us and that place is the zone, which you need to cross. But how you cross it, depending if you like to walk in the nature, or if you like to drive in the car just quickly, whatever, there are these different options, pluses and minuses, which you need to consider. And there's never just one way. And this means that when they construct a tentative new model, this needs to be put into practice first in sort of partial projects. We call them spearheads. And then this allow the participants to constantly monitor the possibilities of progress, and gradually the new model activity becomes more coherent and consolidated. We we call this kind of process an expansive learning cycle. So the change laboratory will be planned and designed to take certain steps, starting with questioning the current situation and so on. I will go into that. And the whole process is typically videotaped for careful analysis. It produces very interesting data about how people together can learn to resolve challenges for which there's not a ready-made quickie answer. Now, this is a sort of schematic way to see the layout, the setup of the change laboratory. Here, the participants, the number of participants depends very much on the setting, like I said, and we are facing 3 surfaces. On the right-hand side, you see what we call them, in which we present, typically with the help of video excerpts or other means, we samples from the data that we have collected from the field, which are challenging and which kind of evoke the problem very vividly, concretely. And on the left-hand side, you have a surface where we put these conceptual instruments, which we use to analyze and design. The most prominently is the model of an activity system, which is used to analyze the reasons, the background, and the systemic nature of the challenges. And in the middle, there is a kind of an empty space where you start putting initial ideas, initial tools, and that gradually will evolve into new solutions. And there's movement between, but also movement vertically between the past, the present, and the future. In other words, we always have to also look at the history of these challenges, previous solutions, etc., and also toward the future. So it's a two-way movement. And usually we ask one of the participants, maybe each session may have a different one, acting as a scribe, who, for instance, writes things on the middle surface. When people say, I have an idea, please write it there. And then it becomes a sort of collective memory. But it can be also a researcher. Sometimes the participants are very shy. They don't want to be scribes. So then you have to do it yourself. And now there is a recent, quite useful review article published in Educational Action Research Journal by Nick Hopwood. He looked at 25 years of change laboratories in schools. There were 55 studies that he reviewed there, and it's so you can already see that there is a sizable amount of evidence which can be scrutinized but the thing is that every year there's new studies, and also the method itself develops. So what was published this year is already a little bit old next year. That's the nature of this piece. Now I would like to describe briefly 2 examples, and feel free to ask questions if you feel that I'm going too quickly or superficially. It's difficult, of course, to go into the full detail because usually the data on this is very rich. You have, let's say, 20 hours of videotaped sessions, which are then transcribed, and plus all the fieldwork data. So it summarizing them is not necessarily easy. The first case I want to take up is a colleague in Japan at Osaka at the Kansai University named Katsuhiro Yamazumi. has recently conducted a change laboratory in an elementary school and another one in a high school. This case is from the elementary school. This article is still in press, but will eventually appear very soon. This change laboratory intervention was conducted in a private elementary school in Japan's metropolitan area in Osaka. Historically, this school was focused on fostering holistic development of children. It had the kind of reputation that this is a very innovative, child-oriented school, which emphasizes the type of activities which are not normal in the curriculum. For instance, they had an activity called walking, which meant that they regularly took walks with the children in which children learned to observe things in their own ways and then articulate them in their own ways. But how, during the past maybe 10, 15 years, these pressures toward efficiency, toward test scores, etc., have gradually led to increased emphasis on subject-based, compartmentalized education, teaching in very traditional ways. And this has led to some sort of marginalization of these original integrated pedagogical practices. And this was felt, the teachers in the school felt that we are somehow losing our identity. That the historical legacy that we have been proud of is becoming, it's getting lost. And they wanted to somehow revitalize their school. So Yamazumi's team of researchers, they observed lessons in the school and planned this change laboratory as a collaborative research project with the teachers to overcome this contradiction between these two forces, the traditional child-centered pedagogy versus the new efficiency and grade-oriented pedagogy. And they wanted to develop something that was based on inquiry to overcome this. And they conducted a series of 10 change laboratory sessions, approximately once a month from March 2023 to March 2024. The participants analyzed the contradiction and designed a new activity system for curriculum development and pedagogical practices aimed at generating inquiry-based children's learning. The sessions were held after work on Friday, starting at 5 o'clock p.m. Finnish teachers would have never done that. They're just too spoiled. And lasting approximately 2 to 3 hours. The sessions were conducted in a room at the school designated for the change laboratory, and the teachers participated on a voluntary basis, which meant that the number of them fluctuated a little bit between the sessions. Sometimes somebody could not because of work pressures or other reasons. And the second case is from my own research group's work. It's about the first change laboratory in which the students, the learners themselves were the central actors. It was not with the teachers, it was with the students. It was conducted in 2020 and to 2021 in a public comprehensive school, serving about 500 students in Helsinki. This school is located in an area which is sort of not very wealthy or very highly educated, but not at the bottom either, but sort of in the, let's say, well, you can see that 37% of 38% of the students received special support, meaning that they had learning difficulties or behavior problems or something like that. And 37% studied Finnish as a second language, which means that basically they were largely immigrant of immigrant origins. And 14 8th grade students volunteered to participate in this change laboratory We worked with them for the whole academic year, for the whole school year, starting in the fall and ending at the end of the spring semester. The aim was to identify and test ways in which these adolescents could find and cultivate significance in their own lives. We call it in search for significance, what they felt important. In other words, and we emphasize that this is not just significance for you, but something which you think is also possibly significant for others. So that it's not only individualistically significant, but significance that can be important also for others, in which you can contribute to the lives of others. In other words, we were looking for topics of their personal interests connected with the perspectives for a better world, basically. And the students formed 5 project groups. The topics were chosen by themselves, and also the contents, the process was led by them. The researchers and a few teachers who volunteered were serving as support. We were there to help them when they said, hey, we need this and this. For instance, one of the 5 groups decided to focus on issues of bullying and intolerance toward diversity among the students. I don't know if this is a problem in some schools here, but in Finnish schools, we have a fair amount of these issues of bullying and intolerance among students. And the students felt, especially in this group, a couple of them were also of immigrant origin, had a different skin color and so on. So they felt that we have experienced this bullying. And it's a conflict because you want to go and stop it. But if you intervene, you might be bullied yourself. So will you intervene or will you stay away? That's the conflict of motives. It's also a moral conflict. So they decided that we want to create a documentary film in which we interview both people who have been bullied and those who have been bullies themselves. And we sort of try to open this issue up so that those who viewed this film will feel that they can do something about it. So that was an example. There are 5 groups, and we held 6 change laboratory sessions, no, I think actually 8. This is wrong. And after that, each project group was still supported. We followed up when they went there with their own project to implement it in practice, to bring it to the conclusion. And at the end of the spring semester, each group presented their results in a public event, and so it was important for them that it was shared and not just done for themselves. And like I said, this was the first change laboratory, at least to my knowledge, in which the middle school students are themselves the central actors. So these are the 2 examples. And now the change laboratory tries to accomplish a cycle of expansive learning, starting with questioning, analysis, modeling a new solution, examining the model and implementing it in practice, reflecting and then consolidating and generalizing the new practice. This is, of course, a rather ideal cycle. It never goes so smoothly and nicely. There is always backlashes and interruptions and diversions. So it's not, we can say that this is an ideal typical model rather than a model of that you find in reality in pure form. But it's important that when you design this kind of intervention, you know that, okay, in this session, we focus on questioning, or in this session, we focus on analysis. And you have to bring in the instruments so that that can be actually done productively. And of course, the instruments themselves can be also questioned, even rejected by the participants. But it's your task, your responsibility to say, hey, I'm a researcher. I have these instruments. I offer them to you. Let's try out if they work for you. And sometimes, you know, the participants design their own instruments. It's not only the researcher. And we can simplify this process of expansive learning into here, for the practical purposes here, into 4 steps. The first is the questioning of the existing practice, in which we use the mirror materials as the stimulus. The second step would be analyzing the activity system and its contradictions, both historically and at present, using activity system models as what we call second stimuli. It's important, this issue of first and second stimulus, because this comes from Vygotsky's principle of double stimulation. The idea that you can break out conflict of motives, paralyzing conflict of motives by using a second stimulus in a way. His classic example is the waiting experiment, in which you know, you bring a person to an experimental room and say the experiment will start soon, then you leave and nothing happens. And the person sitting in the room started to wonder, what is this? Shall I leave or shall I stay? That's a conflict of motives. And you observe the person, what is happening. Typically the person says, oh, there's a clock on the wall. When the clock strikes 2, I will leave. That's a second stimulus. The person picks up this artifact, which is in itself neutral artifact, but gives it a certain meaning. Namely, when it strikes 2, I leave. And usually the person does that. In other words, the paralyzing situation of I don't know what to do is overcome by means of an external artifact, which has been given a specific meaning. And this is that's a very simple example of the principle of double stimulation, but we do it all the time. We need cultural artifacts to overcome our own weaknesses, so to speak. Well, Vygotsky said that human beings can control themselves by means of external artifacts. So they are not controlled by outside, but they use external artifacts to control themselves. That we do it all the time, you know. For instance, that's why we have calendars, or that's why we, you know, have various kind of reminders, etc. To help us overcome our own weaknesses, and especially when we have conflicts of motives. Oh, I don't really want to do that, you know. But if you create Annalisa Sannino likes to use the simple example of you want to lose weight, but you like chocolate a lot. And usually you eat a couple of bars of chocolate every day because you like it a lot. So you deal with this conflict of motives. What you can do, you wrap one piece of chocolate in a nice folio, put it in your bag and say, this is what I eat after lunch. And that's it. And then when you eat your lunch, you realize, oh, there it is. That's my second stimulus. I eat that and that's it. That little thing that you have created as a sort of, let's say, extension of your own will turns out to be quite powerful. So we do that in everyday life all the time. But it's very important that when people are facing difficult challenges, like in this case, let's say these kids, they say, shall I go and intervene when somebody's bullied in the schoolyard, or shall I just stay away because it's a little bit dangerous? So they found that when they create this artifact, this film, they will have a totally different courage to face this kind of situation. So this was, in a way, they were creating their own second stimuli in this. So different kinds of of artifacts. In this case, initially, the models of the activity system are usually used in change laboratories as second stimuli, so that people can kind of gain control of the problematic situation, at least as a first step. And then comes the modeling of future-oriented solution. And there you use you start talking about the zone of proximal development and what we call germ cell models. I will come to that that kind of show way toward the future. And then the fourth step I want to talk about is examining, implementing, and consolidating the new model with the help of spearhead projects. So I go quickly through these 4 steps with both examples. Case 1 is a case from Japan. Change laboratory for overcoming the split between integrated and compartmentalized education, as they described it. And the questioning and using mirror materials was done in this way. In the first session, they used 2 mirrors. One was a report of interviews conducted in advance with 9 teachers, which explored the problems faced by the school. And they typically talked about this, that on the one hand, we have this classroom teacher who teaches everything and has an overall understanding of the development of the children. But we're more and more going toward the subject-based teaching, in which the teachers are not anymore in charge of the whole child, but only of their own subject. And this creates an increasing difficulty, how to preserve this holistic approach. And the second mirror was one teacher's report on the practices of playing and walking, which were subjects unique to this school, and how these have become marginalized, how they still have a lot of potential, but are less and less significant in the overall activity of the school. And the researchers asked, what is not working? What are we up against? Basically, very simple questions that invited them to question the current situation. Then moving to analysis. The participants, they were introduced to this model of the activity system. I know that it's a little complicated and we can discuss it if you feel like it, but it easily takes a lot of time. Basically, the idea is that it's a system in which you don't attribute causes to only one component, but it's always an interplay between multiple components of the system. So here is an example of one teacher, teacher B, using this model to analyze the contradictions in the activity system. And you can see the red texts. These are translations from Japanese. Identify school-wide curriculum versus teacher specialism and homeroom teacher versus subject teacher as kind of sources of tension there. And this discussion where the different teachers through their own models led gradually to a shared view of what is the critical tension there, what is the critical contradiction. And they identified it, this is directly from Yamazumi's article, as the tension between compartmentalized education based on the subject teachers, and on the other hand, the school-wide cross-curricular integrated education that was initially the idea of the school. And how to solve this challenge, how to move forward with this tension was the challenge there. Between instruments, because the instruments were still there for pursuing a school-wide cross-curricular integrated education, but the actual division of labor was organized so that it was becoming less and less possible to do. Now, what they came up when modeling, they produced what we call a germ cell concept of fostering the inquiring child. And this is how they modeled it. You have here the basic tension between systematic subject education and what they call unintentional integrated education. They even called it education with instruction or education without instruction, meaning that, you know, these walks, for instance, they were not experienced as instruction in the traditional sense. The teacher was not telling them what to learn. They were shared processes of experiencing and elaborating on what we see together. And how to overcome this? They identified two key types of actions which kind of can move out of this contradiction. One is fostering questions generated by the children. In other words, letting the children ask questions. Very simple idea, but often quite rare in practice. And the other one was listening to and commending children without prior expectations. In other words, encouraging them, saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more." The idea of simply listening and encouraging children to express their own perspectives and interpretations and questions. These actions, they started to systematically follow up and nourish. How can we increase the prevalence of this type of actions in our teaching? And this gradually led to the concept of fostering the inquiring child. It is obviously not something that can be easily resolved. The systematic subject education doesn't go away. But at least you have a way to constantly work on the contradiction. The contradictions cannot be eliminated. They cannot be wiped away. That's the very idea of dialectics. They are there, but they can be used as springboards to move forward and to transcend them, move to a different level. And this typically requires very concrete steps. And one of them, the first spearhead that they designed was what they called it bookmaking, in which children select their own themes and spend the whole year creating a book, transforming writing on one's own into a natural outcome rather than something the children felt compelled to do. In other words, for a whole year, each child had their own favorite theme on which they were gathering writing texts and gradually creating at the end of the year it was a book, that's what's interesting about this type of spearhead is that it kind of transcends the temporal punctuation of school education. It expands the time frame, because usually it is that you learn from this, it's punctuated by lessons and by examinations and by semesters, whereas this one had the sort of expanded continuity, which is very significant for let's say expansive learning, that you don't have to rush, that you have time to elaborate and generate something new. Of course, it means that it doesn't eliminate the regular timetables of the school, but it expands them by adding something new. And the second one was incorporating this integrated education, as they call it, as a new component into the 6th grade curriculum. In the Japanese national curriculum, they now have made space for particular kinds of activities which can be designed in the school, and especially in the 6th grade. And so they use this opportunity to sort of further develop these ideas of walking and playing, etc., into real curricular units. which are now integrated in so that they are part of the curriculum and not just sort of something that is pushed aside. So this is the first example. And the second example, I hope, how are we doing with time, by the way? Are we running out of time?
Yeah.
I think,
Oh.
we can move.
Quickly.
Okay, I'll be very quick. Sorry about that. That's it's a professional disease.
We
You know.
really enjoy it.
Yes, that quickly about the second example. The starting point was that many Finnish students do not like school. They're burned out at school, are often absent or drop out, or do not find school meaningful. Only 52% of Finnish 8th and 9th graders say they like school. And 20% of middle school students have experienced school exhaustion, as they have found out. Finland is also positioned very low in international OECD comparisons of student happiness in school. This has been a lot discussed lately. So this was one of the reasons why we wanted to conduct this change laboratory, to address these issues. A recent national survey of adolescents' health produced a list of issues that adolescents worry about. So as a mirror material, they used that list, put it up front, and also excerpts from the interviews we had conducted with these students, in which they told about their personal worries and concerns. And we asked, what are some of your most important worries and concerns? What might be a project that you would find significant to address some of your concerns and worries? So that's how gradually they formed these 5 projects and groups. Examples are, like I mentioned, the project to create the documentary film against bullying and discrimination, which they titled "Everyone Should Be Accepted as They Are." Another example of very different was a project to create a tabletop fantasy role-playing game in imaginary geopolitical tensions. It was 3 boys, special education students, who were considered troublemakers in many ways, but they decided to go their own way, and it turned out to be very interesting because they actually were creating something quite unexpected. Now, here is an example of the second group. I mentioned this fantasy role-playing game group, how they analyzed their own activity. I'm not going to have time to go into it, but it was quite interesting that these boys, these 14-year-old boys who were considered rather hopeless cases from the point of view of academic success and discipline, were able to do rather demanding systemic modeling of their activity several times. This was just one time they did it, and they did it 2-3 times. They modeled. Systemic modeling is not very easy. You know, you try to do it yourself and you realize that that's quite demanding. So we were quite surprised that, of course, it has also some very interesting aspects, because they might point out that one should take the playing seriously enough, but not too seriously. And you know, there's they expressed these things in their own language and in their own perspective. That's a little bit rude, but that's how they wanted to express it. In other words, when you play a role-playing game, you cannot become only a destructive force. You have to some extent, take the others into account. Otherwise, the whole game will collapse. So I'm sorry about their own language, but anyway, modeling solution. And this is what we, in the change laboratory sessions, started to see that we call it empowered learning. On one hand, there's the studying for grades, which often means also for some students constant failure. And that can lead to all kinds of problems, alienation, absenteeism, etc. On the other hand, pursuing what is significant, to discover yourself what is significant, not only for me, but potentially also for others. So the student-led projects and in partnerships with other actors outside the school, for instance, the group which made the film, they invited a professional filmmaker to help them because they were not sure that they can do a good documentary on their own. And this worked out very well, but they needed to go beyond the school walls to find partnerships. So this type of a model of what it might be to create empowered learning. Again, this doesn't eliminate the regular curriculum, the regular teaching, but somehow we need to consider how to integrate this type of elements into the curriculum, so that the curriculum is not only what is constantly dictated from above, but that there is also the element of empowerment for the students and how to build that in. We haven't solved it, but I think that it's a crucial issue for the future of education. Here is an example. My student, Pauliina Rantavuori, has just is just defending her dissertation on she studied particularly the group that made the documentary film and analyzed what she calls discursive actions exemplifying students' powers. So taking ownership of the process, committing to take concrete actions, expressing knowledge and competence, claiming ownership, recognizing one's own progress, taking transgressive actions also, meaning that refusing what the authorities are suggesting. And what is interesting in this, when she followed all this 8 session plus the follow-up sessions altogether, I think, yeah, 11 or 12 sessions, and she found that it's that power doesn't increase in a linear way. The actions of empowerment, they reached their peak in the session number 5, when they actually had consolidated the idea that this is what we want to do. This is the film we want to create, and this is the initial script for the film. When they had that, after that, this this type of actions of exemplifying power were not so much needed anymore, because they could, the power was now becoming was in the object itself, in what they were creating. So in a way, power is not something that develops in a linear fashion. It's connected to the object. When you create an object that starts to drive itself, like in this case, this film, you don't need to claim power anymore so much. This was very interesting because in a way, this led to the concept of object-oriented power that she proposes in her dissertation, that it's we often think of power as something that a person has over the others. But here, it's a different notion of power. It's a much more, let's say, positive notion. It's not power as suppression of others, but it's a power that stems from an object that takes a life of its own, in a way. So, to conclude, whoops, what am I doing wrong? Yes. Sorry. Each of the 5 projects may be regarded as a spearhead into the zone of proximal development of schoolwork. And they produce durable material outcomes, like, for instance, the film, the 10-minute documentary, which is in the internet and has been shown in numerous schools, or the tabletop fantasy game project. They produced a real game with the rules and map and various props, and it led to actually some teachers raising their grades, and they realized that they have produced something quite impressive. So the teachers started to pay attention to these boys' potentials more than they had it, because previously they were already coined as failures. So I would conclude that we can think of the zone of proximal development that is somehow displayed in these two examples for school work, school education, in terms of three dimensions. One is the temporal dimension, that you move from just rushing through skin deep knowledge and correct answer, which is a predominant way of education in many schools, still naturally is, toward also taking time to ask questions and find principles why. In other words, some more longitudinal time perspectives need to be incorporated in school education. Like in these two cases, you saw both of them. The Japanese case, the bookmaking was a 1 year process. And at the same thing in this Finnish change laboratory, the project lasted 1 year. That's much more longitudinal perspective on learning than just, you know, for the next lesson or for the next exam. And then there is the socio-spatial dimension, the vertical one, moving from relatively enclosed classroom. Sorry, it's blocked, but I don't know what you can do about it. Yeah, encapsulated, we call it, from encapsulated classroom toward classroom and school, which join forces with outside actors for common good. In this case, especially in this Finnish example, for instance, joining forces with this professional documentarist was of very critical importance, because they could also see, there's a particular expertise here to make a film, which we can learn from. And obviously the school itself could not teach that. You needed others. You need the partnerships. You open up, de-encapsulate, as we might say. And then the third dimension, which is perhaps the most important, the red one here, is from this idea that the students just reproduce prepackaged knowledge toward something like co-designing the future, taking power of your own learning, taking ownership of your own learning by becoming a co-designer. Yeah, so this is it. Sorry that I exceeded the time.
Thank you. So I'm aware of the time, but do you have one or two like pressing questions? Yes.
Thanks, Professor. And after today's lecture, I found I have so many misunderstandings before about this activity theory. Before I read some articles, it's about some experiment. Before the experiment, that teachers will design the activity about activity theory. Then they use this teaching model to teach students. But now I found it's wrong. They should ask participants or students to use activity theory model, then to analyze their problem, their own problem, right? Then find the solution. And I want to know, so what should the research do before the experiment? What should we do? What should we prepare? It's mirror materials.
Lot of people, depending how much you know, depending how much you already know about that activity. If you're a teacher yourself, you probably know quite a lot. But then the risk is that you might be too much inside. You also need to be able to look at it from outside. I have a little example. The very first change laboratory in a school we conducted in Finland in the early 2000s, we went to a school. It was a very, let's say, rather poor area of the city. The first thing that struck us is that during the break between the lessons, students were sitting on the floor in the corridors. The whole school was full of students sitting on the floor. And we were wondering why. And the students said, well, because it's cold outside, it's winter, it's -10 degrees there, and the teachers have allowed us to do that. And there is no other place to be. So we sit on the floor. So we filmed them and took the film to the change laboratory and asked the teachers, if your workplace was such that after every 45 minutes you would have to sit 10 minutes on the floor, would you like it? No, we never thought about it. And it's a workplace for the teacher, for the students also. So they started to design spaces where there were sofas and where you can meaningfully sit down and work and not just be on the floor. Very simple thing, but often we are blind because we are so used to the practice. These teachers didn't initially think that there's any problem with the hundreds of students sitting on the floor every 45 minutes. To us as outsiders, it was absurd. So we need both to be inside and outside. Switch the perspective and collect this kind of material that can somehow open up the contradictions.
Thanks, Professor. And actually, I'm not so familiar with the mirror, this concept. So it's some questions that can let participants know what is the problem and let them to think how to figure out. It's just some questions, or there are some other materials.
It is very important to bring powerful evidence, concrete evidence. It can be interviews, videotaped interview excerpts, or other kind of evidence. It's not enough that you ask them to do it. You have to have stimuli. You know, in healthcare, we sometimes settings we do so that the patient who feels that he has not received proper treatment, we bring the patient himself there and he tells. So that's evidence. And then the doctors, who are usually they think that they know everything. They suddenly realize that, oh, we have not done a very good job with this patient. And, you know, it depends, of course, on the context, but sometimes this can be very effective because it kind of forces even very powerful professionals to rethink, are we really doing a good job here? If the patient feels that his problems are not solved, that he's being pushed around, but not helped. So, you know, the idea is that it's not to blame, but to wake up.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you for the great answers. Any more? Okay.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your interesting or also fabulous lectures. And the question is, okay, as researchers, we conduct this intervention program, except to collect data as the evidence and being a supervisor or provide some instrument for the participant, what should we do as a researchers? Can you show us or share us with some your own experiments?
Yeah, obviously I can't do it in the time frame, but basically what you need to do is to make sure that this process is well documented so that it can be carefully analyzed, so that you can learn from it and others can learn it, and that you can spread it in the research community so that these kinds of interventions are continuously developed and not just repeated. So we have developed various quite rigorous methods of analysis. For instance, identifying in the discourse of the change laboratory, identifying how people formulate or express symptoms of contradictions. You know, various kinds of dilemmas or conflicts, even double binds, as we call them, in which they say that something is impossible. You know, and identifying systematically those in the corpus of the discourse in a let's say the whole change laboratory. It can give you a sense of what is the actual dynamics there and how to make them better next time. The same thing, we also have methods of identifying the different steps in the expansive learning, the different learning actions, and seeing where there might be interrupted or where there are obstacles for pushing that forward. And then that is very important so that we can learn how to overcome and prevent those kinds of obstacles. So these methods have been developed and they are constantly developed further. And if you're interested, I will be very happy to send some references of specific empirical methods of analyzing this type of data. Because we are not only interventionists, we are researchers. These two roles are sometimes quite demanding to keep together. Because as an interventionist, you are involved, you become kind of a participant. But as a researcher, you have to be very objective. And what is important is that you also have to record your own actions. In other words, when we videotape the sessions, it's important that also what the researcher does is recorded. So we can analyze our own actions as interventionists and to say, aha, so that we can identify possibly, you know, how certain ways of leading the change laboratory can be effective or sometimes also defective.
Okay, yeah, so.
To reply this. Okay, thank you, I understand. So maybe I can describe as a researcher, our mission is to identify the question and then as just like a supervisor, we organize the intervention program, and then we collect what the participants do and what we actually do in this program. And then we can create a model, just like two researchers you mentioned, and then we create this model to see what we can improve or how can we imply in the other situation or in other school or some place.
Yeah, you have it right. It means that we have multiple roles, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Because of time, so maybe I can also share my thoughts. I think I receive a lot of proposals for PhD studies, and the most common thing is they tell me, okay, I'm going to do a control group, experimental group. I will use AI to help them to learn academic writing. Control group will not use AI. This will use AI and then compare for several semesters, etc. I felt that's maybe not the right way to do it. And maybe the better way is you have a group of students who are using AI to learn to write, because you cannot control people not to use AI anymore, right? Because everybody is using. So instead, you observe what they do with AI in writing. So you record, like screen recording, where they're doing prompts, generating ideas and putting into their own words. And then you interview them, you survey them, you collect all the evidence, and then you come up with conclusions. Which worked, what helped them to produce better writing, what didn't. And that will be much more meaningful way of doing change laboratory research, right? Yeah.
Doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong with the controlled experiments as such, but we should be aware that they don't solve the whole issue. The risk with the controlled experiments, or you know, as they call them, randomized controlled trials, RCTs, is that you tend to become blind to what happens when the participants create something, because you only expect them to do what you have designed. And this blindness can be very dangerous. Already a long time ago, the famous anthropologist Gregory Bateson was saying that experimentalists typically discard data which is disruptive. And that should be the most interesting data, actually. But they say, that's a statistical error. Eliminate that. So we never look at those subjects who don't do what we want.
Yeah. We predict the outcome,
yes,
and then we try to
it
force it to happen, right? Yeah, self-fulfilling, which is not the meaningful.
It doesn't mean that this type of studies are useless. But we should be aware of the limitation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we reached the time. Thank you so much for coming to the session. Thanks to Professor for the wonderful expression. And our GRIFE will continue to host such seminars. Please pay attention to the email announcements. So every month we'll have public seminars. Okay, thank you so much. See you. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yeah. The nice session.
Yeah. Oh, wait.